Okay, so to continue on talking about comparative advantage versus absolute advantage, let's look at the absolute advantage of our same example. If we talk about an absolute advantage, if you remember, we say the absolute advantage is the ability to produce a good using fewer inputs than the other producer does. As we saw, Rose had the absolute advantage in both meat and potatoes. However, opportunity cost and comparative advantage come into play. Remember, we talked about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is whatever someone is willing to give up to obtain some other type of item. For Rose, it takes 10 minutes to produce 1 ounce of potatoes. Those same 10 minutes could be used to produce 1/2 ounce of meat. Thus, the opportunity cost for producing an ounce of potatoes is 1/2 ounce of meat. If we look back at Frank, it takes Frank 15 minutes to produce 1 ounce of potatoes. Those same 15 minutes could be used to produce 1/4 of meat, 1/4 ounce of meat. Therefore, the opportunity cost of producing 1 ounce of potatoes is 1/4 ounce of meat. So the opportunity cost of 1 ounce of meat is the inverse of the opportunity cost of producing 1 ounce of potatoes. So when we look at the comparative advantage, the ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than any other producer, Frank has the opportunity cost of producing potatoes, therefore has a comparative advantage in the production of potatoes. Rose has a lower opportunity cost of producing meat, and therefore has the comparative advantage in the production of meat. Because the opportunity cost of producing one good is the inverse of the opportunity cost of producing the other, it is impossible for a person to have both comparative advantages in production of both goods. This is why comparative advantage is essential in trade. When specialization in a good occurs, assuming that there is a comparative advantage, all total outputs will grow. As long as the opportunity cost of the producing the good differs across the two individuals, both can gain from specialization in trade. Frank buys 5 ounces of meat and 15 ounces of potatoes. This implies that the price of each of the ounce of meat is 3 ounces of potatoes, which is lower than what Frank's opportunity cost of 4 ounces of potatoes to start with. So therefore, the trade is beneficial to Frank. Rose buys 15 ounces of potatoes and 5 ounces of meat. The price of each of the potatoes is 1/3 ounce of meat. This is lower than Rose's opportunity cost of 1/2 ounce of meat. So, trade is also beneficial to Rose. The price of trade. For both parties to gain from trade, the price at which they trade must be between the opportunity costs. In our example, Frank and Rose must take at the rate of between the 2 and 4 ounces of potatoes for each of the meat. This is a way that two individuals, even though one can produce faster rate than the other, but the individual who can specialize in growing one thing to produce more and then trade more of what he grows to someone else who's raising cattle, he can spend more time developing and using technology to even grow more potatoes, or she can spend more time growing and developing more cattle. So again, like I said earlier, you're not going to have a formula like this on any of your tests. None of your assignments will have stuff like this. I just want you to see the opportunity cost, how absolute advantage works and comparative advantage works. So really focus in on the definitions and look through your graphs, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, so we'll keep moving on in our PowerPoint presentation and also in our book. It starts talking again about Adam Smith. Adam Smith, who we know is the father of economics, we know that he is one of the first ever free thinkers who also considered trade and the value of trade, and also put his thoughts and words into writing. In 1776, more than 200 or so years ago, he wrote The Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nation, basically describing trade. He writes of the ability of producers to benefit through specialization, taking that specialization and then trading with others to have a stronger output and also to help markets grow. Also, David Ricardo's 1817 book, Principles of Political Economics and Taxation. Ricardo develops the theory that we've been talking about of comparative advantage and argues that restrictions on free trade only damages both people who are involved in the trade. We realize that the government sometimes puts embargoes or trades effects, and those are not related so much to what we're talking about. We're talking about more of free trade and when it doesn't have other outlining effects. So if we talk about that and we talk about the benefits of free trade as an issue that generally agreed upon by most economists, and the theories of arguments developed by these two individuals more than 200 years ago. If you think about those thoughts and theories are still being used today. So we talked about our meat and potato and Frank and Rose example, but I read another example where it talks about I thought really was relevant for this. But let's talk about Tom Brady. Let's say Tom Brady had to mow his own lawn. So imagine if Tom Brady had to mow his own lawn, and it would take him 2 hours to mow his lawn. Tom would have the absolute advantage in mowing his own lawn. He's probably stronger than all of us. He could probably afford the better equipment than all of us could. He could deflate his tires to move faster. Just kidding. But anyways, Tom Brady would probably have the absolute advantage of being able to cut his own grass better than anybody else. It takes him 2 hours to do it. But let's say in that same amount of time, Tom Brady could go film a TV commercial in 2 hours and make $20,000. So if he goes off and makes $20,000, then he pays someone who specializes in cutting grass. They can probably cut it quicker. They probably have better equipment. They probably know how the right lawn weed killer to put out, the right edgers to use. They would have all those pieces. He wouldn't have to buy all that. So he could pay someone a lot cheaper than what he could to do it in a short amount of time. Then he could go out and make the $20,000. In this case, both of them would have the absolute advantage. Tom Brady could make more money utilizing his time better making the TV commercial. The guy he's paying to cut his grass, could specialize in cutting grass, probably could do it a lot quicker, a lot faster, and a lot cheaper than Tom Brady probably could even do it. And they're both engaging in the market. They're both making money. They're both having inputs and outputs. So, if he and the person both were hired are better off, as long as he pays the individual less than the $20,000, it makes common sense for Tom Brady to pay someone to cut his grass. And that would be comparative advantage. So when we look at it, a lot of times there's questions out there whether, if we should invoke trade or should we only buy stuff that's made in the U.S. I agree. I think we should buy stuff made in the U.S. when we can. But invoking trade and using specialization to trade with other countries can produce more products, better quality, and more quantity, which drives the price down, which allows more people to have opportunity to own it, and allows more people to be able to have more experiences and enjoy more imports or exports. So make sure you look through imports and exports. I know we're kind of running out of time on this section. Make sure you look through the principal comparative advantage, which suggests that each good should be produced by the country where a comparative advantage in producing the good is a smaller opportunity cost. Remember that through specialization in trade, countries can have more of all goods to consume. We can have more of all goods to consume. Trade issues among nations are more complex, so I'm not saying that we should just open up the borders. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm just wanting you to see the advantages that trade has. Some individuals can be made worse through trade. If we shut down a steel mill here in the U.S. to buy steel overseas, then it will hurt those individuals individually in that small town. However, if we're bringing in more steel, we can make more buildings, make more cars, therefore the prices drop, more individuals are able to have those and possess those things. So it's kind of a give and take. It's just like with supply and demand. You have to find what is the best for your community or what is the best for your situation that you're looking into. So anyway, the biggest thing for trade is to realize how important it is, the value of it, and also how to graph it using the supply and demand and the two charts that we talked about. So read through your textbook. There will not be any large numbers or anything that you have to walk through on your first test at all. So don't panic about the numbers, but do know the terms and know the models and just know about them, and you should be fine on your test. As always, if you have any questions, let me know.